Hey, everybody, this is Al. I'm in Philadelphia at the Kelly Writers House. And it's week 7. This is chapter 8, the New York School Poets. And we're all excited about having a conversation today about the New York School Poets, whichever direction you want it to go in. I'll say who's here. I have one shout out, and then we'll get started. This is going to be a special 1 hour or maybe hour and 4 minute webcast, a short one, but it's lunch break. We all have to get back to doing other things. So maybe the listenership, the viewership will go up when people realize it's only an hour and we don't have to slog through an hour and a half. But that'll mean it'll feel really short. So we'll get right to stuff. We have Emily Harnett here. Hello, Emily.
Hello, Al.
Hey, Davey. Hello.
Hey, Al.
How are you?
I'm good, Al.
Carlos is here.
What's up?
What's up? Gabe is here.
Hi.
And we have coming remotely from Los Angeles is Molly O'Neill, the amazing Molly O'Neill, where it's 9:04 a.m.
Good morning.
Hello. Hey, Molly. And we have Erica Kaufman coming from the beautiful Hudson Valley. Hello, Erica.
Hi, Al.
Hey. And Dave Poplar in Massachusetts, contemplating his philosophical navel, I think, right?
As always.
As always. And, of course, we have Lily today, who's not at the table. She's filling in for Anna at the phone, so she's at the phone. Hey, Lil. And the number is 215-573-9752. And we have Chris and Zach, who are the heroes of the whole operation. Chris and Zach, snaps for Chris and Zach. And we have Eric Weinstein here, who is a community TA of long standing. We really appreciate him. We have some students from English 88/ModPo, and we're going to get to them, I think, at some point, I hope. And we have a special guest. We have Chris Callison-Birch, who's a professor here at the University. Zach, Chris is a professor here at the university, and he's here. I guess I did him a favor a year ago by coming to his class. Can we get him a portable mic? Orly, quickly. Thank you. Thank you so much. Hey, Chris, how are you?
Great.
Good.
I'm
Can
really
we bring
excited
Chris's
to
mic up
see
a
what
little
happens.
bit? Yeah. What did I speak about? I guess I spoke about ModPo in your class.
Yeah, so I'm actually a professor in the computer science department, and I teach a course on crowdsourcing. So I thought this class was a very intriguing example of how a huge group of people come together to make something very interesting. So Al, very
It was
generous.
very nice of you to invite me. I had such fun. I was a little bit of maybe a shock because I was so loud and opinionated or something.
Let's say our computer science lectures tend to go a little bit differently.
Yeah. So it was so much fun, and you're such a good guy, and so I invited you to come here to see this in action, and there might be an opportunity in this next hour for us to get the mic back to Chris so he can say something about what he sees the possibilities for crowdsourcing in the humanities and the arts, or something we might do that could teach you guys.
Yeah,
something.
wonderful.
So
Happy to comment
thank
later.
you for coming. So I just want to do one shout out, and then we'll get right to the questions. We have somebody is looking. I think Zach is looking at the forum. Did I say Zach? Gosh. I'm looking at Zach, thinking about you. Gabe, I'm looking right at you. Gabe is looking in the forum called October 26 Webcast. Here is the place to post comments and questions. And I believe Davey is looking at Twitter, and we're all sort of keeping track of that. So 215-573-9752 for the call. The shout out is to a thread called Awkward at Forums, ? Awkward at Forums. And Kathy D. so generously started that 4 days ago, and it's a really happening thing. So it's one of these meta forums, meta threads, where we're talking about why it's hard to post, why people feel shy about it, why some people who are actually reticent in life are not in online forums. So I hope you'll go to that. It begins, do you feel ill at ease commenting in forums? How do you overcome this? A place to ask questions and give advice. Commenting in forums is an important part of ModPo, but not all of us are completely comfortable here. So go there. That would be great. I have some books to give away, which we will do maybe after the first caller. First caller is going to get a Kaya Sand book called A Tale of Magicians Who Puffed Up Money That Lost Its Puff. Kaya Sand is a poet we admire around here. Okay, so what do we have in the forum, Gabe?
In the forum so far, we have a lot of generic meaning genre-based questions. So some people
There are
generally
no
ask
generic
me- Yeah,
questions.
not generic, genre.
Boring,
generic.
mediocre, middle.
So some Mandana asked how important is the New York of the New York school,
Yeah.
both as setting and as like an identifier for these poets. Malika asked, what are the importance of outliers for this classification that we're making? Who's slightly outside of it? How do we deal with that? Do these people see themselves as being in that classification? And that question is also echoed by Shirley.
Okay. Shirley Collins, Malika Dar James. So, Davey, you think about cities and poetry all the time. You want to start, and then maybe we'll go to Erica Kaufman, who knows New York pretty well and might have something to say about the relationship between the New York School and New York. And also, I should point out, oh, hey, Max, I should also point out that Erica, it really, really, really likes the New York School style as a teachable thing, and also that has influenced her own poetry. So, Dave, you want to start?
Sure thing. One thing that I think about when I'm reading New York School poets, which is something I do a lot, there's some of my very favorite work, is that the New York School poets are writing in the 50s and 60s while two other things are happening. One of those things is abstract expressionism, and the other is urban renewal. So New York City, this is Robert Moses's moment, and so expressways are being built and fought, 500 parks are being built. The scale of New York is really changing. And so it's helpful for me to think about the New York of the New York School as one that's like radically under siege. There's a ton of government money to rebuild the city, and just like what it means to walk around New York City is something that's changing all the time. Everything's under construction. It's like a really frenetic moment. And these are poems that are walking around with a changing self in a changing place. And that's something that feels helpful, just to think about a city that's totally being reimagined as these poems are being written.
Right. So the style is contemporaneous with this.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what is the poem this week? Anyone? What poem this week best exemplifies the poet marveling at what's going on in New York? Anybody? Lily?
I think A Step Away from Them by Frank O'Hara.
That's the one, isn't it?
Yeah, because it's basically a catalog that, it's like something between a catalog and a map of the area he's marking out with his body during his lunch break, of all the things he's seeing. And that includes buildings and people and different cultures that he can see out on the street. Like, it's very... That mode is something that if you applied that mode to a different non-urban setting, it would become a nature poem, or become just a different kind of poem that wouldn't be about people. You wouldn't be seeing so much as you walked in a suburban setting or a rural setting.
Yeah, great. Thank you. That is the poem, so I urge everybody to look at that. Erica Kaufman, do you want to say something about the relationship between this particular style and New York City?
I think that Davey said it really well. I think that the style embodies the city, and I have a really strong memory of one of the first times I read Frank O'Hara. I was in MFA school, and my teacher took us on a walk, and we wrote walk poems as we were reading Frank O'Hara, and we walked to one of his old apartments on University Place. And it was a moment where I really noticed how much is happening around you at all times, kind of like Stein's continuous present. But what I think the New York School writers do is that they give us a sense of what their world was like by putting it all in the poem.
Mm-hmm. Cool. All right. So we have something from the Twitter group, or some more happening with the forum. And Lily, I'm just going to read off the list of poems this week, and I want you to just pick one that excites you particularly. And I'll say again, our number is 215-573-9752. And I'll also ask, who's got the portable mic? Orly? Okay. I'm going to also ask Orly to give the mic to Lo. Hi, Lo. Hi, Lo. I've wanted to say that.
Hello is good too.
Hello is good too. Chris, can we get that portable mic up? Lo, you're also, after Lily picks a poem that she particularly loves, I want you to do one as well from this week that you particularly love so we can just get it out on the record. All right, Lily. The Day Lady Died, Variations on a Theme by Williams, by Koch. John Ashbery's The Instruction Manual. Frank O'Hara's aforementioned A Step Away from Them. Barbara Guest's 20. Ashbery's Some Trees. Ashbery's Hard Times. Ted Berrigan's 3 Pages. Bernadette Mayer.
Do you want me to?
Yeah, well, I'm just putting them out there so everybody hears them. Okay. Bernadette Mayer, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and Patrick Rosal's contemporary poem, Uptown Ode, that ends on an ode to the machete. Can you name one of those that just gets you all excited?
Yeah, my favorite one of this week probably is Invasion of the Body Snatchers by Bernadette Mayer. I mean, I like a lot of the poems this week, but that one, it just is really moving to me that you can talk about such a variety of, I would say, particularly, well, I won't say particularly female experience, but just the experience of being a new mother in a way that's not like sentimental, but contains so much emotion. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I'm really into that poem this time around.
Max, Molly, or Dave, just nod if you're up for responding to this. But let's stick with the Bernadette Mayer poem. How does she do, and she uses an I do this, I do that style. So the question that Lily implicitly raises or explicitly raises is, what happens when that style is not wandering around a city in New York because, O'Hara has the freedom to take a lunch break and just do what he wants, but is actually brought into a domestic scene. It's actually upstate New York and not New York City. And it's a mother dealing with a young child, a baby, and all those responsibilities. How does the style necessarily change? Or how does the New York school, I do this, I do that style actually wind up interestingly reinforcing what Mayer is doing differently? So I ask Molly, Max, and Dave, can one of you indicate by nodding that you're... Dave, go ahead.
I love this poem too. This is one of my favorites for this week. And I think that whole I do this, I do that in this context really makes it feel like the world is getting so much smaller and time is getting crunched down. In the city, the vast array of everything is beyond you, but now we're in a smaller box and it's getting smaller and smaller. And I almost view the first half of this poem before the seed pod as almost like dance ruse for someone who can't get past the existential dread and is on the brink of falling into despair, and it's just so much closing in. So I think that I do this, I do that sort of makes almost an avalanche of the world coming in on you.
Oh, cool. Max, are you prepared to say something about this? Hey, Max.
Yes.
Great.
Hey, Al. Yeah, I think that there's an interesting gender critique happening here where the I do this, I do that is the language of chores and tasks rather than the language of affecting and manipulating the world around you, which is the way that O'Hara deploys it, where he can go out into the phantasmagoria, right, to use a usual kind of like walking around the city idea. He can go out into the phantasmagoria of New York City and kind of affect everything he does. He does this, he does that, etc. Right. Whereas with Bernadette Mayer, she needs to keep track of things that are going on, appointments and so forth.
Yeah.
That's why it's like it's not this sort of like outward or explicit doing. It's more kind of internalized, and that's the way that her body is snatched, right? Like she's her body is snatched by her tasks and chores and the things she has to do, and she's not exactly always in control of what she does.
Yeah, that's so well put. And I think we're going to take the phone call in a second, but I think we're maybe edging toward a distinction that we have not made in the 5 years of ModPo that needs to be made explicitly, which is, we lost somebody on the phone?
Actually, her doorbell rang as...
so she's going to call back?
She's going to call back.
Okay, all right, cool. All right, maybe we'll go a little further on this. So what's been said by Lily and Max and Dave suggests that, of course, Davey is right about the rise of the New York school style in conjunction with the crazy expansion, post-war expansion of New York City itself. But there's something else going on at that very moment, that's equally crucial, that another version of the style of New York school writing in the hands of Mayer at this moment gives us. And that, of course, is what's called the baby boom. That is to say, the domestic, the enforced post-war suburbanization and domestication of women in the 1950s and 60s, so that you get Mayer kind of confined that way. And those two things turn out to be the two sides. On one hand, O'Hara, a slightly more Whitmanian, out there, look at all those other cool people that I love to see in New York. And Mayer actually left her own, kind of to her own devices. Lo, do you have the mic? Hey, pick a poem. What do you like?
So I liked a lot of poems this week, but one of the ones I really liked was The Instruction Manual by John Ashbery.
Mm-hmm. Why did you like it, Lo?
I thought it was really cool. I thought it showed the resistance that, we have as young writers, especially in school, between, writing what we have to write and writing what we want to write. So I thought that was interesting. And I thought it was pretty funny how it was all made up and it was sort of said a lot about human experience and do we really need it to write about things.
Mm-hmm. The instruction manual, kind of a gag, but deadly serious in a lot of ways. So Carlos and Emily, say one thing about the instruction manual that you think is interesting. Emily first.
That especially in the context of kind of the New York school, where there's a type of kind of peripatetic kind of urban experience that's being prioritized and kind of transcribed. The instruction manual kind of borrows the form of that, the kind of ambling quality, but to suggest that there are types of experiences that you can have only in the imagination, or that you don't really need access to what is at this point a type of urban landscape that few people really have access to.
Mm-hmm. All right, cool. Carlos, your thoughts on the instruction manual?
Yeah, I would say much of the same thing. That's what I find interesting about the poem. That it's almost Dickinson-esque to me. That it's sort of like the mind affects reality, but also literature sort of affects reality, and you can live in that.
Yeah.
Just walk around in that.
Cool. Lo, could you give the mic to Lily Light? Gabe, what is the downside to this experiment? Is there a downside to the instruction manual?
One could be that the sort of lived experience of Guadalajara is sort of lost in his humorous, fantastical vision of it. So he's approaching it with this humor, this campiness to it that I think is very appealing. But Guadalajara shines in this very specific way that perhaps Guadalajara City, actually in Mexico, might not, shouldn't. And John Ashbery, it's John Ashbery's version of it, and also it is to say also, this is completely separate, that the instruction manual itself doesn't have possibilities or something like that. Not to be defensive about instruction manuals, but it's also saying that there is not a productive way of doing this, and so I am in my mind.
Cool. Davey and Molly. I invite Davey and Molly to just respond. Is there a response to Gabe's downside?
I think one thing to tie in here is something that might speak to Gabe's downside, which is coming to us from Twitter. Colleen Knight, thinking about the instruction manual.
Say it slowly.
Sorry, I have to translate down to normal human speed. Someone wound my batteries too much today.
Okay.
Colleen Knight says, the instruction manual, quote, makes me look within and outside of New York. At lunchtime, he's insular and worldly at the same time. And I wonder about the benefits of that insularity, where insularity is a downside, it's a lack of possibility, but then also is a kind of protection, a kind of... there's something about the New York school that's also, maybe she's suggesting, bounded by New York, that New York is a frame of possibility, a space to walk around in, but also a kind of stuckness, a kind of detachment from, a Guadalajara that's only imagined and perhaps in ways that are, super problematic.
And stuckness in the sense of being young and having a shitty job, which is to write the instruction manual for a new metal.
Right. And so there's what we were saying about, it's O'Hara's lunch break and he can wander around, but also he has he's super aware of time. It's 12:20. It's 12:40. Shit, I have to get back to my office.
Right. And in Ashbery's case, in the instruction manual, lunch hasn't happened yet, and I'm sitting in the office, and I don't want to write what I'm supposed to write.
Yeah. So freedom and stuckness are hanging out together here.
Yeah. Colleen, hi Colleen, would you tweet a follow-up to that tweet? Because I want to know what you think of Gabe's sense of the downside of the instruction manual. And Molly, do you have something to add to this on the instruction manual? I'm gonna paraphrase a version of Gabe's downside, or the downside, which is in service of a gag about how you really don't want to have this stupid job in Manhattan. He's deliberately creating a satire of a place he's never visited, kind of not fair to the real Guadalajara, which actually is real. And there's a kind of expense there. The satire is very funny because he reproduces the idiocy of brochure tour guide language, but he's actually talking in a way that suggests he understands about real people, and there's something appropriative about that that's a little creepy. Is that a fair enough version of your? Yeah. Okay, great. Molly, what do you think about all this?
This is not going to be the answer you're looking for at all.
Oh, am I looking for an answer? Okay.
There's something that feels to me super privileged about it, and this is like first world problems that, I'm stuck at this desk doing this job in Manhattan when I really want to just be able to do my art all day. And
right. So you're supporting Gabe's sense of the downside.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Lily, let's go to the phone. Who is on the phone? And can we get Lily Light? Do you have the mic? Okay, cool. All right. Who do we have?
This is Denny, who's also known as Nicholas on the forums, and he wants to talk about Uptown Ode that ends on an ode to the machete, the
cool.
Patrick Rosal poem.
Very cool. Denny, how are you?
Yeah, I'm great.
What's that?
I'm good. Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, we can hear you well. Where are you? Do you mind saying?
I'm in Seattle.
Oh, cool. How is ModPo going so far?
ModPo's great. I guess this is my third time through, and
wow.
And it's a very expansive class. I mean, it's a great class. So thanks for offering it.
Thank you, Denny. It's our pleasure. We have a lot of fun doing it, don't we? Isn't this fun, Davey? Yeah. Kaya Sand's book is going to be mailed by Lily to you. You'll get Lily your address before you hang up?
Wow, great.
Yeah, I think Kaya knows the West Coast. I think there's a certain, right? What town?
Oh, wow. That's cool.
Portland, Oregon. So cool. All right, good. So do you have a question or comment for us about the New York school? Oh, no, that's right. You wanted to talk about Rosal.
Yeah, I mean, I really love the addition of this poem to the curriculum. I think it's a really interesting and great poem, and I read it through a couple times and listened. I heard your little discussion, the discussion of it, and I kind of just wanted to say that that I thought that. There's a lot of intriguing elements to the poem, and I think you kind of like touched on some of them, but I think that that the references to the obvious kind of references to ethnicity. Are maybe a confining element of the poem. I mean, it's easy to kind of like hone in on that element. But which is of course central to the poem. But I just wanted to kind of comment that I felt that the poem also kind of has a more universal element.
Mm-hmm.
That it's not just something that that you can sort of like relate to or get inside of, like if you're part of a particular diaspora or something.
Yeah, I get that. I get that question. It's such a good question. How about, Denny, if you hang up and listen to the response through the video stream, and we'll give some responses. And then maybe if you have a follow-up, you can go to the subforum or to the Facebook group and add a follow-up comment. Does that sound good?
Yeah, that sounds good. I wanted to make one other comment in relation to that, is that I thought that sort of the element of the second half of the poem, let me explain, and then with the machete,
Yeah.
and then the reference to duende and stuff, and there's like a really interesting essay by, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but there's, I mean, if you Google Garcia Lorca and duende, then he's Garcia Lorca like wrote this kind of interesting essay on what on what duende meant to him.
Yeah. I think that's a great reference. I thought we mentioned that in the video, but maybe we didn't. Denny,
maybe he did. I don't remember actually.
Thank you for being part of the ModPo community for 3 years, and also for noticing the new poem. I mean, that's really important to us. We want this thing to keep growing somewhat organically. It's very hard for a new poem to break into the main syllabus, which is already so full. But we have some ideas for refreshing it slightly, and then, of course, all the other new stuff goes to ModPo Plus and the Teacher Resource Center. So thanks, Denny. Thanks for calling.
Well, maybe you could talk about how the new poem relates actually to the New York school.
Happily. Happily.
Okay, thank you.
We will.
Thank you.
Thanks, Denny. Stay with us and hang in there. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Bye-bye. All right, that was a great question. And Lily, I'm not going to presume that you know this poem that well, so we're going to hold off on turning to you spontaneously unless you have something to say. But Carlos, just a quick reaction to Denny's really polite, really sort of modest way of wondering whether it's, and I'm putting words in Denny's mouth that I don't mean to, but maybe too ethnic, that the ethnicity of it constrains it, I think I heard him say. How would you respond to that?
Well, I think he was conscious, and he said that, of course, it's essential to this poem as well.
Yes.
But I think, sure, yeah, that this poem can be taken beyond ethnic constraints. The first half can be read as it's a ritual, people coming together and creating a kind of home on this dance floor, let's say. And that doesn't necessarily have to tie into ethnicity. That can be anyone who feels sort of isolated or away, and this kind of ritualistic happening is good for that. And then the second half is a complication of masculinity, which, we can talk about more, but that obviously can apply to any ethnicity besides the fact that much of the references go towards a certain culture.
Mm-hmm. All right, really well put. So who wants to comment on this further? Gabe, have you thought about this in response? Can we say something about its relationship to the New York school? Why did we put it there? Why is it there?
I've been asking myself this question. One thing that I was thinking, and maybe people feel differently, is that I sort of feel like the first half, the before the translate, is the New York school.
Totally, right?
And then the
It's
rest
O'Hara,
is
isn't it?
yeah, exactly. So it feels like the first half rides off of these specificities of names, first names mostly, or last names. A lot of artists, Tito Puente, Hector Lavoe.
Just throwing the
just name
dropping,
Mm-hmm.
and also for present tense.
Yeah, and then it ends with this sort of higher statement of "we are all trying to get home," and then says, "Allow me to translate," which I sort of feel like is also saying, just let me do that another way. And so one statement that this poem is making is that the second half and the first half are equal in some way.
Yes.
That one is a translation of the other. It means the same thing.
Yeah.
And so it seems to be a reflection on the New York school style, maybe a reflection on what that style can achieve, and then also a moving away from it.
What its limitations are. Yeah. Chris Martin, I'm going to play just the beginning of Patrick Rosal performing the poem. And what I guess a thought experiment would be, for those of you who know O'Hara's breathless, I do this, I do that voice, let's see if we can hear some kind of homage orally to that at the beginning. So, Chris, are we ready for this? Okay, I'm bringing my volume up most of the way.
Uptown ode that ends on an ode to the machete. Me and Willie hail the first yellow to fly us from Franklin and Fulton over the bridge to zip up the east side where the walls are knocking to Esther Williams or Laveau. And Willie daps up Orlando and I say, what's good? And it don't take 3 minutes for me and Will to jump on the dance floor or post up at the bar sipping on barrilito or to tap on my glass a corny cascara with a butter knife like I'm Tito Puente, but I sound more like a 78 gremlin dragging its tailpipe its length of 119th. It's not even 5 past midnight in El Barrio and I'm nodding to Jibo spinning one ill cut after another.
So there are several O'Hara poems which are basically bar hopping poems, and it really is resonant to that. So, Davey and Erica, so let's just say where you think it goes away, just in a meta-poetic way, in a ModPo way. Why is it there as a way of understanding how contemporary poetry, much more conscious of diasporic issues, right, but still loving New York in the same way, why we begin to see where the New York school style can go so that it is more responsive to contemporary New York, which is obviously so much more of an immigrant experience, even than it was then at the time.
And one of the things that it does is it conceptualizes that New York as being relevant to the rest of America as opposed to exceptional from it.
Yeah.
That Allow Me to Translate begins, there are neighborhoods in America whose denizens steady rock their goblins by the first and last law of moving bodies. So I don't think O'Hara would ever say, one, neighborhood is not a word he would ever say. Neighborhood is a weird word for queer poets. Neighborhoods are funny places for queer people often. Neighborhoods in America is not something he would ever say. I don't think that his New York, he's thinking about the way that
O'Hara.
Yeah, I don't think O'Hara is thinking about the way that his New York is adaptable to neighborhoods in Cleveland or neighborhoods in Los Angeles or neighborhoods in Toledo. And Rosal really is. Rosal is thinking about the way that his New York is available to people having experiences of neighborhoods everywhere. It's local in a way that O'Hara's isn't.
So an interesting implicit response to Denny's really great question, which is, I take your saying, not more confined, actually less confined.
Sure.
Right? Because of the global interests, concerns, and issues. Less New York specific.
Yeah, interested in coalition in a way that I'm not sure O'Hara is. O'Hara is interested in his people. I don't think it's necessary for O'Hara to scale out to make his poem available to everyone. And that's what the translation does. It's like, this is what I do. And like, this is what you do somewhere else. And it's like this. And we can bond over it together.
Yeah.
O'Hara doesn't care. And Rosal really does.
Yeah, well, really well put. I just think we did a real service to the use of this poem. I don't think Patrick Rosal would mind at all. We can ask him. He's going to be here in a few weeks. He's a Philadelphia-based poet. I would mind being the opportunity to teach and learn what service the New York school style can be to contemporary issues. Erica, I actually promised to turn to you on this. Do you have a thought on maybe generally on where the New York style could go?
Well, I would add to what Davey said and also point to the fact that what Rosal is doing is he's also democratizing the New York school moving around the city motion and resolving some of the tensions around privilege and class that we see in Ashbury. And this is a multi-ethnic poem.
Yes.
I think that that's something that's also really, really important and really valuable in terms of where the New York school maybe might go.
I want to, Erica, stay there for a second. I want to go to the phone, but I also want to kind of ask a meta ModPo or a meta anthology question, because ModPo is at its essence in the main syllabus anyway, an anthology with all of the consequences of its choices, right? And it's very hard to change those choices because we'd have to remake all the videos because they keep referring to the poems already in the syllabus. I mean, we're limited in a way. We're kind of an organic MOOC compared to a lot of other MOOCs. But still, we're limited in our structure and our arc. So can you think about teaching, you think about selecting poems that represent, right? So I know the downsides of asking a poem like this to represent. But what can we just say what the upsides are so we remind ourselves so we're not beating ourselves up on forcing things to represent trends and styles as they kind of morph in the contemporary scene? Is there an upside? Please, God, make there be an upside.
Is this for me?
If you want.
Yeah, I think that there is an upside. I'm trying to
Think of
one
one.
of the things that we see in Rosal's poem, and I guess the upside is in terms of like being an editor and having to pick pieces for an anthology, you know, and I'm speaking as an editor, not necessarily as like a person thinking about close reading and stuff like that, but just speaking pragmatically, you know, you always want to think about a poem that is operating on many different levels. Mm-hmm. And is sort of doing a lot of different things. And I think this poem by Rosal is extraordinary. I think it's a really, really good poem. I think it adds a lot to the syllabus. And that's because it does what we think of New York School poems as doing.
Yes.
We're definitely traveling around the city. We're meeting friends. We're seeing the city through the eyes of the speaker. We're hearing conversations. But at the same time, the speaker is doing things with regards to race and class that we don't see in the New York School, or at least in that first generation of New York School writers. And, you know, I think the fact that all of these things are in one poem is a big upside, right?
Yes. So there is a tradition is too strong a word, but there is a pattern in ModPo to engage a poem such as Langston Hughes' Dinner Guest Me that is pretty fully aware of the way in which it anticipates discussions about canon and inclusion and undigestibility of certain poems. To use the metaphor of that poem, which is, you know, dinner. Am I going to be eaten for dinner? Is that why I'm here? So that consumables. ModPo if it's going to be alive, and Josh Klein, a student who's sitting in this room, has made this observation. If it's going to be alive, it's going to be a course that actually has to have that happen as part of the conversation. And I think Rosal, I think McKay, I think Hughes, I think some of the poems in chapter 9.2 on the aleatory poetry basically call all of this stuff into question in a way that helps us move on and be aware. Okay, great. So, Lily, who's on the phone? Let's go to the phone.
This is Bob Berlowski. He wants to talk about John Ashbery.
Okay, great. Hello, Bob. How are you?
Okay.
Good. How's San Francisco today?
Well, we got a little break in the weather here. We're starting to get into the rainy season here.
When we were out there, it was perfect.
Yeah, October, and then right after you left, we started.
I know. I heard we left, and it started to be San Francisco. It's a darn good thing the Giants are not in the World Series, or we'd have to be looking at them through fog. Anyway, Bob. So, do you have a question about Ashbery for us?
Well, it's more of a comment there because what struck me in reading him was that how he's really kind of tweaking the reader, and you know. We saw that the instruction manual, of course, was an open kind of a parody here, but I even saw in the other two poems that he's really, it seems like early on and then much more developed in the later poem there, that he's, you know, really playing with a reader.
Do you think, well, we have three poems. The instruction manual is very early. Some trees is super early.
Talk about Hard Times there.
Hard Times is from the 80s.
Yeah, I know. Well, I think that sometime, I mean, he wrote it, to me, he's like taking on or transmuting or transforming the whole love ballad tradition there. I mean, he's writing, it's interesting, I noticed those two poems, he's writing in these even quatrains there, kind of like, you know, and he's just like totally changing what's your idea of what a love ballad would be like.
In some trees, yes.
Something like Barbara Allen. If you think of Barbara Allen there, the trees intertwining with each other, and it just has a whole different take on it. But I think it's really in in the second one, which was the hard time series, where he's really he's just using everything to kind of totally subvert what he's writing there. I mean,
Yes.
for instance, the first thing that struck is that it's a very square poem.
Yes.
4 lines, 4 quatrains.
Yeah. Well, that's
It's very square, and he starts. And he starts off. He starts off like I feel like he starts off like he's saying, trust me, and then he's like talking, and you kind of, and all your analysis is like you're taking it very seriously. Like this is John Asbury talking there, and then all of a sudden, it's not till you get to the end of that thing where with the man with the aluminum piece there, all of a sudden you realize
in Hard Times. Yeah.
Hard Times. It's not Asbury talking. He's really talking about a conversation he's had with a street person.
Yeah.
He's having with a street person
Good.
there.
Bob?
We have that today. And so he's subverting that, and he's telling us there. I mean, aluminum teeth. No one wears aluminum teeth. That's the worst material
Yes.
you can put for teeth there.
Thank goodness.
And then he kind of goes and gives us a little bit of and it's like, well, wait a minute. You're putting a lot of reliance because I'm the narrator. You're paying a lot of attention to her. What about this unreliable narrator, or the thing, who's got his theory of everything, and he's sort of probably strung out. He's probably an ex-hippie whose brain has been flushed.
Yeah, Bob.
Flushed.
Hey, Bob. What we're gonna do is we're gonna take those comments that you've just made and respond particularly to Hard Times, and in the interest of happy times, we have about 20 minutes left. So I'm going to ask you to hang up and listen to the responses. But before you get off, I want to give you a book. Do you want a book from us?
Oh, great.
Okay. So now this is going to be hard because the authors of these 2 books are here. And if you don't make them choose. Okay. Good. Sorry. Erica Kaufman's book, Instant Classic. No. What do I just screw?
Just shaking my head at you, thinking that was appropriate.
Yeah. It was appropriate to make him choose because, the poets are here. Yeah, okay. Yeah, right. Okay, good. I crossed the line there. Bob, Instant Classic, Erica Kaufman's book will be on its way to you. And Erica's not here to sign it for you, but we can figure out a way to put her in touch with you about it, and I'm sure she'll be interested in what you think of it. So thanks for calling. Make sure Lily gets your address. Okay? I think we already have your address, but we'll get it again. Thank you. Thanks, Bob.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, take care, buddy. All right, so Hard Times. What can we say about Hard Times? This is a Reagan-era poem. Lily, you have the mic. I'm going to read the first line and ask you just to give a reaction to the first line of Hard Times. Okay, Lily? All right. Trust me, says the speaker. Trust me. By the way, that's already a problem, isn't it? Trust me, the world is run on a shoestring. Okay. Tell me about your reaction to that line.
I think it's very honest. The world is run on a shoestring.
Meaning it's true.
Yes, I think it is true. I do trust him as of the first line, especially since like a shoestring itself, if you think about it, is very small and thin, yet at the same time it's very strong. So
well, when somebody says I'm not, my income is very low, and I have to live life on a shoestring. What do they mean?
They're very not fortunate, poor, on bad times.
Well, shoestring means living on a shoestring means barely making do, reusing things. A shoestring budget means very little. Yeah. So the world is run on a shoestring, Lily? You think that's true?
For some people, I think it is true, and I think a lot of people don't really realize it. You know, you walk on the street, you walk up and down Locust, and you see people who are asking for food and they're asking for money.
But Ashbear's not talking about them. She's talking about the people who run the world. The world is run on a shoestring.
The world wouldn't necessarily yes, it would run without them, but at the same time it wouldn't, because those are the people, he's saying, who are having to live life to the fullest. They're having to make their life do day by day. They're the ones who really are getting everything out of it.
Let's give the mic. Thank you, Lily. Let's give the mic to Darby. Emily Harnett, speaker. you've read a book. I hope you've read a book called Moby Dick.
I have,
Okay.
thankfully.
And he says, "Call me Ishmael."
Uh-huh.
Already a problem.
Mhm.
Like, wait a minute, you have to, or Nick Carraway, another unreliable narrator, right?
Mhm.
So when somebody comes up to you as a speaker and says, "Hi, this is a poem. Trust me, the world is run." Well, how do you react to "Call me Ishmael" / "Trust me"?
The kind of shared feature of both of those things is in asking for a certain type of trust, right? Call me Ishmael, kind of consent to my terms as I've laid them out, or just to trust me. You wonder why they need your trust up front, basically, why you have to advance your trust. It makes them seem less trustworthy.
Yes, exactly. So the world is run on a shoestring, either as a scary truth or totally unreliable. Darby, quickly on this?
I guess well, my sense of the world is run on a shoestring was kind of more with the fact that it's a Reagan era poem and it's kind of that era of pervasive fear and uncertainty, is that even the people that look like they're in charge, that look like they're running the show, that hopefully you think they have some idea of what they're doing, even those people are often one step away from disaster and one step away from not quite knowing what's going on, especially, in the 50s with the nuclear, burgeoning nuclear era, nuclear scares. A shoestring budget is my first sense of the word, but after that kind of dangling by a thread was my next thought. And so the world is kind of held together, on this gum and shoestring.
Yeah. Great
barely
comment.
keeping it from,
Yeah.
going off the rails.
Great comment. Let's get the mic migrating over to Orly. I'll just add to this, Max, I'll just add to this the first line of the last stanza, which Bob Berlowski was talking about. Once they made the great trip to California and came out of it flushed. And now every day we'll have to dispel the notion of being like all the others. In time it gets to stand with the wind, but by then the night is closed off. So once they made the great trip to California, that's very resonant with the American experience and with the gold rush, not the gold rush, well, the gold rush, but moving away from the Dust Bowl and getting to the land of milk and honey and so forth. Max, anything to add about the way that is set up once they made a great trip to California?
Well, it's set up like a coda. It almost seems like you could hack that last stanza off and the poem would stand on its own. It's this interesting, almost like, I was thinking a little bit about the squareness of the poem, right, that we were talking about. It's interesting that
Bob was talking about the squareness of the quatrains.
Yeah, Bob was talking about the squareness in his comments earlier. It's interesting that Ashbery has this almost nostalgic feeling for an earlier era in American capitalism, right? Of like when it was all about manifest destiny and getting out to California, and there was gold in those hills, and that's how you acquired your wealth. But now that in the Reagan era, now the border is closed, and we have we're off the gold standard thanks to Nixon. We have inflation, we have the destruction of labor unions, and capitalism has become this intangible thing. It's no longer about a border or a frontier. It's something that exists at a remove, that it gets down to you at some point, but you don't know how, and you can't separate it. You can't really hold on to it. So it's interesting that I think to link up this almost nostalgic moment for manifest destiny and the squareness of the poem, that Ashbery is trying to create something that seems almost solid or durable in light of the increasing radicalization, I would say, of capitalism in the Reagan era, right, where capitalism becomes this shifty thing that's everywhere all the time and can no longer be held onto. So he seems almost, and this would be like the conservatism of Ashbery, although he's a pretty open-minded guy in many ways, but this would be almost the conservatism is trying to create something solid and durable in the face of an increasingly kind of radical, pervasive, extreme world system.
So couple thoughts there. One is you didn't mean that as a set piece reading of the poem, but it's like the perfect set piece. So with your permission, I'm going to create a clip and add that because I think,
Please.
no? Okay?
No, yeah,
Yeah.
of course.
No, I think that was really brilliant, Max, and you are amazing. I like the last point you made, which is that there's almost a gesture here to make the squareness, and square is used as an adjective in the 50s, at least for conservative. The squareness of the form becomes a kind of conservative hedge or a conservative ironic juxtaposition with the radicality of the content. Because the content is saying we see through the Reagan era, Morning in America, California, here we come, everything's going to be okay. Once they made the Jodes, driving from the Dust Bowl, Reagan's family, frankly, or Reagan himself, right, who comes from the Midwest and ends up in California. Once they made the great trip to California and came out of it flushed, meaning with lots of money, and now every day we'll have to dispel the notion of being like all the others, but in fact it's too late. It's too late. That's really great. Thanks for the call, Bob. What I want to do here is I want to take a quick poll on a couple of interesting Twitter comments and anything in the subform that you think is worth mentioning. And then and we're going to stop taking calls now because we promised we would be done at about an hour. What I want to do is go around and get real quick final words on the New York School. Next week, in week 8 of the course, we move to the final chapter, chapter 9, 9.1, 9.2, 9.3 in weeks 8, 9, and 10. And we get to the so-called language poetry, which starts to get really hard and disjunctive. So Ashbery's disjunctive writing is kind of a prelude to that. So cheerleading for people who want to make the move from week 7 to week 8. We hope you'll get there. I also, as we go around for final words, I want to give Chris a chance to just observe something about what he's seen today, which is just a little sliver of this, a sense of what he thinks the possibilities are. And that would be orally giving the mic to Chris. So a quick survey of Twitter stuff.
Something great that's been happening on Twitter is that some folks have been contributing to a conversation about whether the New York School is sort of engaged in a self-actualizing, sense of personhood or a self-indulgent sense of personhood. Yeah. And T points us to a little bit of Marjorie Perloff's thinking on the New York School, which gestures at the fragmentation and reintegration of the inner self. So we've been talking a lot about how to deal with walking around the city, and New York is something that's changing, and America is something that's changing in Rosal's work, but also the self is changing and breaking and pulling apart and having forces exerted on it and changing as a result of those forces. And that's a great conversation
really cool.
to be happening on Twitter.
That's cool. T, I know you're listening to this or watching it. What time is it there? It's after midnight.
I think there's like 12 hours.
Yeah, it's after midnight. Hey, T, thanks for staying up with us again. T, I would love for you to tweet about whether you think the New York School. Well, Rosal is a Filipino-American, and he's really talking about the Philippines, so that will be of interest to you. But also whether there's a New York School for Manila, I'd really be, because you really know the New York School style, and I'd be really interested to hear. Okay, so quickly from the forum, real quick.
One thing that we probably won't have time to address in total or whatever, but that I find really interesting is Pamela Joyce Shapiro is asking about craft, but specifically about line breaks. How are the poems that we read this week dealing with line breaks? How are they figuring their line breaks as important to the writing?
Yeah.
I think it's a hard question to answer and one that might take a while in a lot of different cases, but it is a difficult thing to understand because of the way in which so many of these poems are based off of like a quick narrative movement, like The Day Lady Died, long, expansive, long lines relatively, right. And the sentences are moving throughout the stanzas quite quickly, not a lot of pauses. So the line breaks are definitely not breath, definitely not stopping pauses, but maybe there's another figuration of them, and maybe somebody will address it in their final words.
I mean, I think the different poets have different approaches. Barbara Guest has one approach, John Ashbery certainly. So that's a really good question for Pam to have raised. Okay, so we're going to do final words, and they have to be super quick. Okay, so real quick, just one line on something that people should see this week, a poem they should go to, something in ModPo Plus, something in the TRC, or something they should look at for next week. So Max, will you start? Do you have a final thought, final word?
Yes, please check out the close reading I led a couple weeks ago of a Pierre Reverdy poem, which has been included in ModPo Plus, just as a little bit of context for what O'Hara was into and what he was reading, since he famously name checks Pierre Reverdy at the end of Step Away from Them.
He does. And what chapter did we put that in ModPo Plus? Do you remember?
We put that in week 4.
Yeah, week 4 with Stein.
Yeah,
good.
with Stein.
Okay, great. Thank you. Molly, final thought?
In the vein of close readings, I would also say check out the discussion that Robin Kello led in Los Angeles a couple of days ago on O'Hara's poem Le Loup. That wasn't a poem that I'd seen before, and it's a really fun one.
Yeah, it's great. And I'm really glad that Robin, who's a longtime CTA and is now in Los Angeles, did that. And we've added that already to ModPo Plus, I believe. So that would be under the New York School in ModPo Plus. Thank you. Erica Kaufman, final thought?
There's a lot of really good stuff up at the Teacher Resource Center this week because the New York School writers are really useful in the classroom. This week we've got poetry challenges in the spirit of Frank O'Hara's lunch poems. We have a conversation about Ashbery's instruction manual. We have an excerpt of Kenneth Koch on teaching. Just lots of really useful, good stuff over at the TRC.
Thank you, Erica. Can you name the title of the Kenneth Koch book, which a lot of people used to use and maybe still do? Is it Rose, How Did You Get So Red?
Rose, where did you get that read?
Where did you get that read? Rose, where did you get that read? Do you know this thing? Yeah. You do, yeah, cool. Thank you, Erica. Dave Poplar, final thought?
Just a quick thought about the New York School. The thing I like the most about them is that despite how pretentious they can seem to be and how detached from the world, that they're sort of almost anthropomorphizing, or they're looking at it like a anthropology or sociology experiment. They're so self-deprecating and they're so self-aware of what they're doing. So I think that's kind of refreshing.
Self-deprecation is really great. After all that, Williams, although Williams can do some self-deprecation. Gabe, final thought real quick?
Yeah, I was going to recommend, in ModPo Plus, you have a pretty big chunk of Eileen Miles stuff. And I was going to recommend Snakes, which I really like, mostly because I find it very pleasurable to listen to Eileen Miles say, "I'm 6," again and again and again. Pretty good.
With that incredibly magical, alluring.
It's like
it's
sort of like cool. It's like
cool. She makes
like
anything cool. She's saying she's 6 years old. It's cool.
Yeah.
Yes, and I believe that Erica has done a lot of work in the TRC on teaching snakes. So it's a really great poem, and the poem originated in a teaching situation. So cool, right. Really cool. Carlos, final thought, real quick.
Yeah, I would just sort of, I don't know if respond or mirror Dave's comments that I think it's interesting to consider whether or not these poets, people say, are self-indulgent, or if there's a kind of democracy in that self-indulgence that we talked about in 88 class a bit, I think, at the end. Yeah. But I think there's some good discussions happening in the forums about that as well, so definitely check that out.
There are, absolutely. I want to turn now to Chris Callison-Birch, professor of computer science, who's an expert on crowdsourcing. What did you see today, and what does it give you hope that the humanists can crowdsource?
It does. So I have to say this was an incredible, fun experience for me, and I really appreciate your inviting me. Initially, I was skeptical about how can you crowdsource poetry. It's definitely a different model than what we have in the sciences, but I think this really is an amazing course and really highlights the potential of MOOCs and crowdsourcing in a way I think that we're currently failing on in the sciences. Really in the sciences, MOOCs are just a glorified video textbook, but here you're really taking advantage of the crowd part. So it feels like you've got this really diverse group of participants who are trying to collectively arrive at a better understanding of something. And it's really special, and it's really wonderful to observe. So
thanks
for
Chris.
inviting me.
Can we thank Chris for coming by? It's so great. I know you have more to say about all this, and maybe we can invite you into the forums or something and set up a thread to talk about crowdsourcing. Would you be willing to do that?
Happily.
Okay, great. That's fantastic. Davey, final thought?
I want to echo Gabe's support of the number of Eileen Miles poems in ModPo Plus, and specifically direct people to a conversation that Al, you and Eileen had about Mount St. Helens when she was here
That poem.
The poem Mount St. Helens when she was here for Kelly Writers House Fellows as a fellow last spring. Hearing Eileen talk about her work is just a super pleasure.
And also there's teaching in that poem too,
Yeah,
because
so there is.
she has this deceased friend, colleague, who actually was killed on Mount St. a poet who was like inundated by lava on the mountain. It's so weird just even thinking about that. And she knew him not well, but then she had a poem of his tacked up to her wall, and she taught the lines. She taught the way he did the short line, which is also about cutting life short. And so short lines embody the shortness of life, and each time you do a new line, you revive her friend. Yeah. It's really a beautiful elegy. It's like,
that's cool.
God, that's good. That's really good. Emily.
I guess for my final word, I'll tip my hand and say that this is probably my favorite week in the course. And if you, like me, found something about the beat slut last week, their self-indulgence a little airless and suffocating, I'd say to reread The Day Lady Died, which is another poem almost in the Beats model, right? All of the New York poets are kind of almost in that model, but there's a kind of honesty and openness in their self-interest that somehow allows to let other people in. That's a poem all about O'Hara and his kind of boring day that nevertheless ends in a moment of communion and a celebration of someone else's life and art, and it's really beautiful.
That's well put. Thank you, Emily. Lily, final thought?
Yeah, I want to make, since we won't meet as a webcast until Halloween is over, I wanted to make two spooky plugs.
Spooky plugs.
One,
Halloween, by the way, that's U.S. There's a lot of
they celebrate Halloween like I think in the UK they celebrate Halloween.
Okay.
No,
cool.
I
No,
think so.
it's fine. They
But
should anyway.
Right. So two things. One, there's an Emily Dickinson poem that I really like that's very appropriate this time of year. It starts, the first line is, "One need not be a chamber to be haunted." And just recommend if you're kind of missing Emily and thinking like, I want a cool spooky Halloween poem. But then my more relevant to this week plug is something I wanted to add to our Bernadette Mayer conversation is this might be a week in which you're actually watching the movie The Invasion of the Body Snatchers or other such body horror movies. And interesting to bring that conversation or that interest or focus on body horror into this conversation of being a new mother, and what we talked about like the New York school mode of walking around or looking around at things that have changed or are different, and how that relates to the genre of body horror as like a film genre.
Fantastic. All right, just for me, just a couple of quick things. So Eric Weinstein, who's here, but actually tweeted this information, is running a Philly meetup at the Writers House here at 6 p.m. So if you're in the Philly area, if you want to get in your car and come hang out with them, please do that. I also want to point out that Joe Massey, who, Joe is supposed to hang out for week 2, and he's just loves us and keeps hanging out. We're just so grateful to have him around. He tweeted, and it was actually T. De Los Reyes who retweeted this. Joe, in response to the New York school, so Cormanian, instead of I do this, I do that, Joe tweets, words do this, words do that. I really like that. I really, really, really like that. So anyway, this is Al signing off. I kind of, we're definitely going back to the longer ones where there's more, we can take more calls and stuff, and forgive us for, running so long. But I like the 1 hour thing because there's a certain breathlessness that's appropriate, especially to O'Hara. Just like, we got through a whole lot in an hour. Really grateful to the students, English 88, and to Chris and Eric for joining us, and to Chris and Zach who managed this setup. It's a big deal. Snaps for those guys. Amazing, amazing. And to everybody who cares about ModPo, for everybody who cares about being, I would say, citizens of this crazy, constantly changing community, to people like Denny, who just, hanging out for us for 3 years and then notices the new poem and cares about it and is really perplexed by it, to Bob Berlowski, who was a Writers House fan for, 15 years before he then retroactively discovered ModPo only last year or this year, to our friends all around. We're grateful for your being a friend. ModPo is free, it's ungraded, it's open to anyone, it's open all year, and we want as many people to have access to this material as we can. We are not just a kind of non-mending wall organization, but we are also against walls of any kinds. That's pie in the sky, silly liberalism. There are obviously walls all over. As people in other countries who have faced barriers and limits, even in connectivity for those ModPo people in China, not being able to watch the YouTube clips, for instance, we understand there are barriers, we understand there are walls. This is not a Trump-Clinton debate where one of them is saying, walls, walls, and the other is saying, you quoted me as saying there shouldn't be any walls, but I'm actually more modest than that. All of that stuff. I mean, we have the luxury of saying we're not interested in walls. We want to bring those walls down, even in our own kind of silly, poetic way. And it's great, the more that can happen. The fact that it happens around U.S. poetry seems like a paradox, like shouldn't it be global poetry? Shouldn't it be worldwide poetry? Well, it is what it is. It got created that way, but it's U.S. poetry being read by people all over the world. The last I checked, 48% of the people in ModPo are from the U.S. 51% are not, and it's a very difficult English that we're doing here. That says something about the global reach, and I really admire the fact that 51% of the people are interested in what we're trying to do here and actually shape the readings of the poems, which gets me to reinforce my suggestion that T talk about the New York School in Manila and see what that could be. Thank you all for being here. We already lost our people in the Hangouts, so so it was Dave and Molly and Erica and Max and Gabe and Carlos and Davey and Emily and Lily. Thank you all for being here, and we'll see you next week.